She left the house before him that morning, her heels clacking down the porch steps like they always did when she was late but wanted to seem unbothered. He heard the garage open, the engine stutter once, then fade. The usual rhythm, almost boring in its predictability. He sat at the kitchen table, the steam from his black coffee rising in a narrow, perfect line. Their dog, Atlas, lay at his feet, unconcerned, head on his paws. Nothing felt out of place until he reached for the salt. It was one of those automatic movements, the kind you make without thinking, like brushing lint off your shirt or adjusting your watch. His hand touched the salt shaker, and it skidded slightly. Not because it was out of place, but because the bottom was slick. He pulled it back. A streak of something thin and greasy marked the wood underneath. He brought the base of the shaker to his nose and frowned. It was coconut oil. He knew that smell, refined, subtle, almost sweet. It wasn't a kitchen scent. Not from their kitchen, anyway. She used coconut oil in the bedroom. Not often. It was something she started a few months ago, saying it was better for her skin, that her old lotion irritated her. He didn't mind. It made her legs soft, sure, but it left the sheets a little tacky, always faintly smelling of spa brochures. But now, inexplicably, it was here, under the salt shaker, on the kitchen table, and he hadn't touched her in over a week. He didn't move right away, just stared at the mark. The sun angled through the blinds and struck it, making the streak shimmer faintly on the dark wood. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even obvious. Just a single smear. But it shouldn't have been there. Not unless she was rubbing oil on her arms while making breakfast. And even then, why was it under the salt? Why was the bottom of the shaker, something that hadn't moved in days, slick? He reached forward, pinched the edge of the salt shaker, and lifted it to the light. The base had a faint fingerprint in the oil. Not his. The pressure was wrong. A thumbprint, pressed slightly off-center. He could almost see the swirl of skin, incomplete, imperfect. And that was the moment. That was the exact point when everything slowed, not in panic, not in anger, but in certainty. He didn't say anything, didn't curse, didn't knock over the chair and storm out. He just placed the salt shaker back down gently, right back into the wet print. A perfect fit, like it was supposed to be there, like someone had taken their time. He leaned back in the chair, eyes unfocused now, staring somewhere beyond the kitchen wall. The hum of the fridge filled the room like white noise. Atlas shifted beside him, whining quietly in his sleep. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler started up, ticking like a metronome. He reached for his phone, more out of habit than intent, and saw a notification pop up from her. Just a text. A list of groceries. Innocuous. Domestic. Eggs. Lemons. Almond milk. Something about needing spinach for that smoothie she never really drank anymore. It landed like static in his brain, meaningless words from a person whose voice suddenly felt foreign. Her tone, once familiar, now struck him as artificial. Too precise. Like someone playing a role they were no longer invested in. He set the phone down without unlocking it and looked back at the oil smear. It had already started to dry at the edges, becoming faint. If he hadn't noticed it then, it might have vanished completely. Just another overlooked trace. But he had noticed, and now it was burned into him. There was no confrontation. Not that morning. Not the next. He didn't rush to check her messages, didn't follow her car, didn't interrogate her. He just started watching. And from that one moment, from that single unnatural flaw in their morning routine, everything began to unfold with perfect, terrible clarity. Because people who lie don't always slip with words. They slip with touch, with habits, with physics. And nothing leaves a mark quite like a careless fingertip on an untouched surface. He would remember that morning forever. Not because it was loud. Not because it broke anything. But because it was still. And in that stillness, he realized something had ended without announcement. The crack had already formed. Silent. Hairline. But spreading. The change didn't happen all at once. That would have made it easier. An argument, a slammed door, an obvious betrayal. But no. This was quieter. Like the way a light flickers just before it burns out. At first, you think it's just a glitch. A moment. But it keeps happening, and one day, you realize the room's been dim for a while, and you're the only one pretending it isn't. She was still kind. Still affectionate, in a way. But it had corners now, edges that hadn't been there before. When he'd brush her hair back from her face, she'd lean away slightly, just enough to seem unconscious, like a reflex. When they watched movies on the couch, she kept her legs tucked in, phone resting against her thigh, face lit by that screen glow that seemed to hypnotize her more than anything on screen. She used to fall asleep against him. Now she didn't even lean. She started using words like space and self-care with a deliberate gentleness, as if over-explaining would make them less sharp. She said she was working on herself, that she needed time to focus on her career. Fair. Reasonable. But somehow she was always focused somewhere else. Even her smiles felt strategic, timed, measured, and thin. Once, when he kissed her shoulder in passing, she smiled without looking up from her phone. He saw the curve of her mouth, but her eyes stayed dead. Then came the locked phone. She never used to care. She'd leave it anywhere: kitchen counter, bathroom sink, even face up in bed while she showered. But now it was always with her. Face down. Thumbprint secured. Notifications hidden. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. The silence explained more than any excuse could. She talked a lot about her new therapist, about learning to honor her boundaries and recognize unhealthy patterns. The phrases sounded rehearsed, like something she'd read aloud to herself in the mirror. What struck him wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't. Every conversation about her growth excluded him. He wasn't mentioned, wasn't invited in. It was as if her life had become a monologue, and he was just the backdrop. A familiar silhouette, still sitting at the table, still making coffee, still asking how her day was, but no longer part of the script. She forgot his birthday. That was the first time something inside him genuinely recoiled. Not the date, not the celebration, just forgot. Didn't mention it. No card, no cake, no offhand, happy birthday. Nothing. They'd been together 7 years. And that day passed like any other. He didn't remind her. He didn't need to. The forgetting wasn't the mistake. The mistake was how easily she moved past it. And still, he said nothing. No fights. No accusations. Just observation. The more he watched, the less real she became. She was still in the house, still leaving her shoes by the door, still hanging towels crooked on the bathroom hook like always. But she was fading, like a ghost caught halfway between two lives. And he was starting to see right through her. Then came the almost. The false climax. A Saturday morning. She was in the shower. Her phone, uncharacteristically, left face up on the kitchen table. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Had told himself he wouldn't. That he didn't need proof to trust what he already knew. But something about the placement, so careless, so unlike her, snapped at him like a baited hook. He walked past it once. Then again. On the third pass, he paused. The screen lit up. Not a name. Just a heart emoji. Then another. Then a message. Can't stop thinking about last night. His pulse didn't jump. He just stared. No name. No photo. No app label. Just floating text, loaded with weight and air. Then the screen went dark. He didn't touch it. Didn't swipe. Didn't investigate. The phone sat still, like a loaded gun across the table. A minute later, the water stopped. He stepped back. Picked up his mug. Sipped it like nothing had happened. She came down wrapped in a towel, humming, hair dripping onto her collarbone. She kissed his cheek too quickly and said something about yoga class and running errands. He nodded. Said he'd probably stay in. She smiled that same empty smile. And left. He didn't follow. Didn't ask who had sent the message. He didn't need to. What haunted him wasn't the proof. It was the ambiguity. The game. The performance. The idea that she was careless enough to let that message come through in the open, or cunning enough to make it just vague enough to keep him guessing. Either way, she was gone. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. Gone in the way people leave without packing a bag. And now, he wasn't confused. He wasn't grieving. He was still. Alert. Watching. Waiting. The performance was ongoing, but he was no longer part of the audience. He was behind the curtain now, eyes fixed on the actress who didn't know her final scene had already begun. It was the drawer that did it, her desk drawer, the one in the corner of the spare room she now called her creative space. He never went in there. She liked her privacy, her quiet. She'd claimed that room like a second skin ever since she started working from home more often, saying she needed a mental boundary between work and the rest of the house. Fine. He respected that. Until the printer jammed. She'd left in a rush that morning, off to some weekend networking brunch she'd mentioned offhand the night before while brushing her teeth. The same brunch that now ran into its fourth hour with no texts, no updates, not even a passive heading home soon. He tried to fix the jam from the outside, but the feed tray was stuck, and the manual said to access it from the bottom. Which meant the drawer. Which meant touching her things. Which meant breaking the spell. He slid it open slowly, not expecting anything, not even curious, just trying to fix the goddamn printer. But then he saw the envelope. A blank envelope, tucked beneath a notebook, wedged with deliberate care. Not hidden, but certainly not meant to be found. The paper was thick, expensive. The kind of stationery you buy when you want to make an impression. Inside was a folded sheet. His name wasn't on it. Neither was hers. But the handwriting was hers. Slanted, careful, pretentious as hell. She always wrote like she was afraid someone might read it. And someone had. Thank you for seeing me yesterday. I needed that. I miss your mind. I miss your hands. No greeting. No name. Just those words. Then a small sketch at the bottom, one of those little doodles she used to draw for him years ago. A pair of interlocked hands. The irony was surgical. It wasn't vulgar. It wasn't sexual. That would have been easy to confront. Easy to despise. But this was intimate. This was real. It was the kind of message you write to someone you can't stop touching in your head, even when they're not in your bed. And that's when he knew. Knew in a way that required no confirmation, no confrontation, no tears. Not because of what was written, but because of what it took to write it. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment mistake. This was curated, selected, ink on paper, carefully folded and preserved. She didn't write that to end something. She wrote it to maintain it. To preserve something sacred to her that was already rotting everything around him. He didn't sit down, didn't blink. He folded the letter back up, slipped it into the envelope, and placed it exactly where it was. Like a surgeon closing a chest cavity, making sure there were no traces left behind. The printer sat half open, still jammed, forgotten. He walked out of the room and shut the door behind him, slow, precise, like sealing a vault. That's when the shift happened. Not rage, not sorrow. A cold, electric calm that settled in his chest like the moment before a sniper breathes out. He stopped wondering. He stopped hoping. Something ancient clicked into place behind his eyes, something that didn't ask why, didn't negotiate, didn't forgive. This wasn't heartbreak. This was strategy. He looked around the house, their house, and saw it differently now. Every photo frame was a prop. Every shared object a lie waiting to be erased. He thought about the months of distance. The smiles that didn't reach her eyes. The locked phone. The boundaries. The lies dressed up as enlightenment. All of it was scaffolding for this letter. He realized then that she'd already been living in two worlds, and she'd just assumed he'd never cross into the other. But she was wrong. Because now, he wouldn't just cross into it. He'd burn it down. And she'd watch. She'd feel it in layers. Not in a single blow, but in slow, precise cuts. Because the thing about quiet men is they don't erupt. They calculate. They don't scream. They plan. And now, the plan had begun. She got home later than usual, breathless with the false energy of someone rehearsing an alibi. Keys jingling too loud, laughter in her voice that didn't match the weight in her eyes. She dropped her purse on the counter and launched into some vague story about traffic, about a coworker's emergency, about how today was insane. He let her talk. He just watched. Leaned against the edge of the kitchen island, arms folded. Silent. Not angry. Just still. She finally noticed. Her smile faltered. What? She asked, forcing a casual shrug. You look like someone died. He almost laughed. Almost. But instead he said, I read the letter. Just that. 5 words. And the room changed. Her face froze for a half second, an involuntary flicker, fast as a pulse, but he caught it. She tried to recover, blinking too slowly, turning toward the sink like she hadn't heard him. What letter? She said, too light, pouring water she wouldn't drink. That's not even. What are you talking about? But she knew. And now he knew she knew. The one you left in the desk drawer, he said, voice flat. The one thanking him for seeing you yesterday. The one where you miss his hands. Her shoulders rose, then dropped. She didn't turn around. You went through my things? He stepped forward once. I fixed the printer. You hid it under the notebook. Not well. She finally turned. Face composed now. Cooler. Almost amused. It's not what you think, she said, and he had to bite his cheek not to smile at the cliché. You're reading into things. It was just a conversation. An emotional check-in. He's an old friend. You've always been jealous of my friendships. That was the first cut. Not from her words, but from her tone. Patronizing. Measured. Like he was a child who had misunderstood a story. I'm jealous, he echoed. Of a man who needs thank you notes for holding your hand behind my back? She scoffed then, real contempt in her breath. God, you're so dramatic. You always take everything so personally. That's why I can't talk to you. No, he said, stepping closer. You can't talk to me because I remember who you used to be. And you hate that mirror. That landed. She flinched. He pressed in. You used to come home and tell me everything. Now you give more of yourself to a stranger than to the man you married. And you call that growth? She crossed her arms. We've been drifting for months. You know that. I've been trying to find myself by erasing me, he snapped, voice rising just enough to shake the glass on the counter. You don't find yourself by lying to the person who gave you 7 years of their life. You find yourself by being honest. But you couldn't even give me that. Her voice cracked then, small. I didn't mean to hurt you. He laughed, bitter and clean. You didn't even think of me. That silence that followed was heavy. But she wasn't done. She stepped forward, face shifting, pulling on that last, familiar mask, the one with guilt laced in performance. You've been distant too. Always working. Always tired. Maybe if you paid more attention, he cut her off. Don't you dare. His voice dropped to a razor's edge. Don't rewrite this. I was tired because I was carrying us. I was distant because I thought you needed space. I stepped back so you could breathe. And you used that breath to whisper someone else's name. Her eyes shimmered, lip trembling just enough to betray her. She looked down. I just wanted to feel seen. He leaned in now, voice sharp and steady. You were seen. Every single day. In every little thing I did that you stopped noticing. The dinners. The bills. The patience. The silence. I saw you so clearly I stopped seeing myself. Her face twisted, like she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. You make it sound like I'm a monster. No, he said coldly. You're worse. You're ordinary. Another selfish woman who found a new toy and thought she deserved applause for hiding it well. That broke her. A sob slipped out before she could stop it. The tears came, slow at first, then frantic. She tried to speak, but nothing came out but noise. He didn't flinch. Didn't reach for her. Just watched. Watched her try to gather the pieces of her face, the fragments of her dignity, all slipping through her fingers. You don't get to cry now, he said softly. You cried when it was still a choice. This is consequence. She collapsed into the chair, head in her hands, breath hitching like a child. And he just stood there, tall, unshaken, done, not gone, but beyond her, beyond all of it. Not angry, just finished. And that was the last thing she saw before she broke completely. Not the man she cheated on, but the man who would never miss her again. She didn't follow him at first. Just sat there, head down, sobbing into her palms like she could undo what had already been carved in stone. But when he turned away, slow, measured, without a final word, she shot up from the chair like gravity had changed. Wait, she gasped, her voice hoarse, unsteady. You're just leaving? He didn't answer. He moved toward the hallway with the weight of a man who wasn't rushing but had already left. You're overreacting, she blurted, desperate, chasing the retreating back of someone who used to turn around when she called his name. It was emotional. That's all. You've been so cold, so checked out. I didn't know how else to feel alive. He paused in the doorway. His face didn't change, but the silence thickened. You think this is about emotion, he said, voice low, unreadable. This is about deception. It wasn't just what you felt. It was what you chose. Over and over. Her eyes were wide now, frantic. I'm not the villain you're making me out to be, she whispered, stepping closer. You're not so perfect, either. You shut down. You stopped talking to me. I felt like I didn't exist. He turned to face her then, slowly, precisely. You didn't feel invisible, he said, voice steady as steel. You felt entitled to something new. Something easy. So you looked for magic in someone who didn't know your ugly days. And when you found it, you wrapped it in poetry and called it growth. Her lips parted, but nothing came. He stepped forward, one deliberate pace, eyes locked to hers. You could have told me you were lost. You could have asked for help. Instead, you drew maps for someone else. You built a second life and smiled at me like the first one still mattered. She shook her head now, the tears blurring everything. You'll never find someone who loves you like I did, she spat, bitter and broken. He tilted his head, a faint twitch of disbelief in his expression. You didn't love me, he said quietly. You loved the man who held your guilt. You loved my silence, my patience, my forgiveness. That wasn't love. That was convenience. Her body trembled. She reached out like she might grab his arm, but he didn't move. I made a mistake, she said, voice cracking. People make mistakes. I'm human. I didn't know what I wanted. But I know now. I want you. I want this. Please, don't throw it away. The irony sliced through the room like glass. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he had loved, but the shell she'd become, the shape of regret wrapped around pride. You threw it away the moment you needed a secret to feel seen, he said, quieter now, the words cutting sharper for their calm. You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of decisions. You just didn't expect me to survive them. She sobbed again, louder this time, like volume might make the room forget. A neighbor's door down the hall creaked open and shut quickly. Someone had heard. Someone always does. But he didn't care. There was no shame in truth. Only in betrayal. I can be better, she begged. I can fix this. We can fix this. Please don't give up on us. His eyes didn't soften. There is no us. There's the version of me you needed to stay small, and the version of you that needed more. And I'm done shrinking to keep you faithful. Her legs buckled slightly, and she leaned against the wall, mascara streaked, mouth open in disbelief. I didn't mean to hurt you. The final whisper. The last card. He looked at her one last time and said, with absolute certainty, you didn't care if you did. Then silence. No rage. No slam of doors. Just the vacuum of finality. The moment she realized he wasn't angry anymore, he was done. And that was the real end. Not the letter. Not the confrontation. This. The silence that followed truth. The stillness of a man who didn't need to punish her, because losing him was punishment enough. She slid to the floor, and he walked away without turning back. It was about 8 months later when she showed up at his doorstep. Not unannounced exactly, she had messaged twice that week. Once at 2:43 a.m., a single line, I still love you. And then again the next day, voice note unreadable through the tears. But he hadn't responded. Not because he was angry. That part had withered long ago. He just didn't feel anything anymore. She stood outside his building now, thinner, disheveled in a way that couldn't be explained by bad weather or a bad day. No makeup. Clothes wrinkled. Eyes sunken. Her hair, once an immaculately managed weapon, hung dulled and tangled around her collarbone. I just wanted to talk, she said when he opened the door halfway. Her voice cracked like an old record. Just for a minute. Please. He stepped outside, kept the door at his back. The hallway light flickered overhead. He didn't offer a hug. Didn't ask how she was. She talked fast, like time was about to run out. Said she'd lost her job, downsizing, they called it. But everyone knew why. Word got around. Her little growth partner, the man she betrayed him for, had ghosted her 3 months ago when the whispers started. He moved cities. Blocked her on everything. Friends she once confided in had all backed away one by one, too embarrassed to be associated, too cautious to be next. Her sister hadn't returned calls in weeks. Her parents told her they needed time. The woman who once measured her worth by how many rooms she could dominate now couldn't get invited to a baby shower. I don't even recognize myself, she whispered. I keep waking up in a place I don't remember falling asleep in. I keep hoping I'll hear your voice. She looked up at him then, eyes glassy, pleading. We were soulmates. You know that. You knew me better than anyone. Please, just talk to me. I don't have anyone left. And that was the moment, the final mirror. He didn't gloat. Didn't spit venom or remind her of all the ways she tore him down while pretending to heal. He just looked at her like a stranger. Like someone he might have once passed on a train. And that was worse than cruelty. I used to know you, he said, voice level, emotionless. I don't anymore. She winced like he'd slapped her. You said we'd always have something. We did, he replied. Then you set it on fire. She tried to argue, but her mouth just opened and closed. Nothing came out but a choked sob. I was lost, she said. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, no, he cut her off gently. You knew. You just didn't care until there were consequences. He watched her face collapse again, a slow-motion implosion, mascara she hadn't even put on smearing from sheer habit of wiping her eyes. She tried to reach for his hand. He didn't pull away. He just didn't react. Like her touch no longer existed in his world. You're not the woman I loved, he said quietly. You're the person who taught me what love doesn't look like. She crumbled then, right there in the hallway, knees giving out as her body folded over itself, a sobbing heap of someone who finally saw the wreckage in full daylight. He let her cry, let her sit in the ruin she created. And when she finally stopped, when her breath was nothing but a dry whisper, he turned, opened the door behind him, and stepped inside. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back, just closed the door gently, and with it, every chapter she thought she could reopen. And that was the end of her story. Not with flames, not with justice, but with irrelevance. She wasn't the villain anymore. She wasn't even the ex. She was just someone who used to matter. And now? Just a stranger with a shared past. Thanks for listening. Let me know where you're watching from. and what you would have done if it were your wife.